But I think every citizen of the United States should understand guns and should understand exactly what they are talking about when they talk about guns.
Thank you for tuning in to the Removing Barriers podcast. I'm Jay.
And I'm MCG.
And we're attempting to remove barriers so we can all have a clear view of the cross.
This is episode number 6 of the Removing Barriers podcast. In this podcast, we're going to talk about Christians and firearms. And we have a guest with us this evening, our first guest sitting at the round table with us.
This is Brother MD. We have known him for many, many years. I've known him for at least a decade now, I'm pretty sure. And I'm sure you've known him for a decade too, right?
Around a decade when I first came to the church.
Jack of all trades, engineer at heart, former veteran or current veteran, Navy, is that right?
Correct, yes.
Wonderful man and enjoying life as a homesteader now, pretty much. Slash farmer, slash apiculture, slash what other slash can we put in there?
Vermiculture.
Vermiculture. Didn't realize
worms,
that.
Yes, indeed.
Wow.
Well, MD, welcome to the Removing Barriers podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
All right, let's get right into it. Why don't you tell the audience about yourself and your history with firearms?
Well, I'm a former preacher's kid, and my father was a small-town preacher. 50 years, and until I was in high school, he never pastored a church large enough to pay him a salary.
Oh, wow.
So our life was always in areas that were very impoverished and always involved having to raise our own crops, raise our own food. We had to be prepared to shoot the vermin that attacked what we ate. We had to sometimes be prepared to shoot what we planned on eating. So I think I probably owned archery sets, not rubber-tipped. These were actual steel-tipped arrows.
Oh, wow.
Since I was 8 years old, I had slingshots that were capable of firing half-ounce, three-quarter-ounce rounds, fast enough to kill a rabbit on the run.
Oh, wow.
Probably could have knocked a human being down if I'd hit him in the head with it, but I learned early on to respect anything that can cause harm to a living being. I never shot anything without a good reason. I certainly didn't shoot anything I didn't plan on eating. I watched my father. He didn't either. He was a World War II veteran. And as a result of his experiences and the fact that he brought his rifle home from the World War II, something can't be done now. I shot my first .22 when I was 10 years old, and I shot a .303 Lee Enfield sniper rifle when I was 11 years old.
Oh, wow.
Was not prepared for the kick. That rifle knocked me flat on my back.
Oh, wow.
It was a pretty heavy rifle. But I learned early on. Fired my first shotgun probably when I was 19, maybe 20, on a skeet range. I've never hunted with a shotgun. I have been hunting several times. In fact, in 5 years of hunting, I never one time fired a round at a deer, which is what I was hunting, because I could never quite identify the proper gender, the proper age, the proper size, no matter what I did. And early on, I learned, if you don't know what you're shooting at, you don't shoot it. Ever. Too many people have been shot by people who did that and didn't pay attention. So I learned early on to respect weapons. And I've never lost that respect. I shot on a high school rifle team from the time I was a freshman in high school, 9th grade. So I would have been 13 years old when I started shooting on the high school rifle team. I've thought about what it would look like nowadays if someone were to see what our team looked like leaving the school campus to go to the range with 22 rifles sticking out of every window of our coach's VW van. 9 of us, 9 rifles, 10 because the coach took his too. And we had them on the school campus all day long. And this was downtown San Jose, California. No one blinked. We respected safety. We respected the law. We respected each other. And I think that's a critical factor for anyone who is a firearms owner today. Too many don't respect other people. Too many don't respect other people's rights. Many people
don't respect life.
They don't. No, absolutely not.
Right.
There's way too little respect for life. So I learned early on, and I've carried that with me. I'm 66 years old now. Haven't forgotten a thing about what I learned about range safety. And range safety is not just on the range. I've never let the muzzle of a gun cross someone's body when I was walking in the jungle or in the woods. Can't claim to have ever hunted in the jungle. I did, but not with a weapon. But I've never let the muzzle of my weapon cross someone's line, someone's body. It's just a totally unsafe thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Do you go by the 4 rules of firearms, or the military have, 3 rules of firearms?
4.
4 rules of firearms. Never keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot, those kind of things.
Actually, the keep your finger off the trigger was not taught when I was in the Navy.
Really?
It was not.
Wow.
No. We were taught to keep them unloaded. Different times, different situations.
Yeah.
Nowadays, if I'm carrying, it'll be cocked and locked.
Mm-hmm.
But my finger won't be on the trigger. No.
1911?
I had a 1911. I didn't like it very much. They don't shoot hollow points, and the problem with any time that you're shooting a gun, if you're using it for self-defense...
You need stopping power.
You need stopping power, but you need that round not to go through what you're shooting at.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely.
There might be someone behind it that you have no intent to ever injure.
Mm-hmm.
So hollow points are much more effective.
Definitely.
And so the 1911 didn't work with hollow points. They're designed not to do that. Now, you can get 45s that will fire hollow points. Mine wasn't. I found that I prefer 40 caliber. So both my carry weapon and my target weapon are both 40 caliber weapons. The target weapon is just too big to be a carry weapon, but they both chambered in 40. They both make the same patterns. I can hit the same targets at the same distance in the same amount of time.
Cool.
Okay, hang on. Before we get any further, because we're talking caliber, we're talking patterns, we're talking 40, 911, all these different things, and our audience may not quite be able to follow. Some in our audience may not be able to follow. So can you tell us, okay, when we're talking about weapons, we know generally there's different kinds. There's semi-automatic, there's fully automatic. Can you explain to us what the difference are between those two?
Sure. And probably the simplest way to start that is to explain the cycle that a bullet, a round goes through, going through a weapon. Because if you're talking about a single shot, there are very discrete steps that the shooter has to take. Mm-hmm. You have to load the weapon. You have to prime the weapon. You have to pull the trigger. You have to pull the expended round out of the weapon and then start all over again.
So we're talking like muskets, pretty much.
That would be muskets.
Okay.
That would be the old blunderbusses. That would be a piece of black iron pipe with a trigger arranged with a rubber band and a nail.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
Which could be done. And you could make a shotgun that way. People have done so. The semi-automatic weapon does all of those things for you with the exception of it only fires one round when you pull the trigger one time. So the cycle would be you pull the trigger, the projectile is expelled down the barrel, the machinery of the weapon, by one method or another, extracts the fired case, cycles a new fired case from storage, and loads it, sets the hammer, sets the trigger, and waits. And it may wait forever. Because if you don't pull the trigger, it won't fire again. A fully automatic weapon does all of those things, and as long as you hold the trigger down, it continues to drop the hammer on every successive round. So you can fire multiple rounds. I know you're going to ask me about M16s.
Yeah.
We will talk about that in a little bit. But the M16 is a very interesting weapon because it was designed in 3 different models. One is all M16s can be fired single shot. You set a selector switch, you fire one round, no more rounds fired till you pull the trigger again.
So tell me, so now we know the difference between the semi-automatic and the fully automatic.
Yes.
But it seems like that those terms are used interchangeably on the local media.
Yeah.
And also they demonize the AR-15, which is usually a civilian weapon, which is a semi-automatic. Why is the AR-15 demonized?
The AR-15 was designed to function in all the same ways as the M16, except it can't be fired fully automatic. The AR-15 is a fully civilian version and cannot be, and in fact was designed not to be modifiable to fire fully automatic. There are gunsmiths who can modify nearly anything to fire fully automatic.
Right.
But not the AR-15 with any ease at all.
Interesting.
It was designed that way. But it looks so much like an M16. It looks like the same scary battle rifle as the military uses. And arguably, the M16 is the commonest military weapon in universal use around the world today.
So is that why the media calls anything that looks like the M16, they call it, like even if it's an AR-15, they call it the assault assault weapon, assault rifle, assault this. Can you explain is the media right in calling it an assault weapon, or are they trying to frame it like it's some sort of fully automatic weapon that's used to mow people down? Or can you explain?
The media definitely is attempting to make the assault weapon any weapon that looks scary and looks like it could possibly someday be fully automatic.
Mm-hmm.
But there is actually no classification called an assault weapon. There are a classification of rifles called assault rifles by the military.
Mm-hmm.
And the M16 is the smallest caliber assault rifle there is.
What does AR stand for then?
I'm sorry?
What does AR stand for?
What does the R stand? Oh, AR?
Yep.
Armalite. The company, Armalite.
So not assault rifle like they say in the
No,
media.
it never did.
Okay.
You will never hear that on the local media.
No, you will not. No, but the AR stands for Armalite, which was the corporation, Armalite Corporation, which was founded to build the M16 for the federal government, United States of America. They're built by many, many different organizations now under license.
Mm-hmm.
But it was designed by Armalite. It was built by Armalite. It was fielded by Armalite by the thousands during the Vietnam War. And that'll give you an idea just how ubiquitous the weapon is, that it still is in common use.
Mm-hmm.
And we are 42 years after the end of the Vietnam War now.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. So let's dive a little bit deeper, because I think it was probably a year ago now where there was a ban on bump stock.
Yes.
What are bump stocks, firstly?
The stock of any rifle is the furniture by which you hold the rifle to stabilize it so that you can aim it when you shoot it. Those things, in order to be accurate, have to be very firmly fitted to the barrel and the workings of the rifle, or the rifle will not be accurate. Bump stocks are not fitted firmly. The purpose of the bump stock is to allow the recoil of the rifle to bounce the rifle back against the shooter's trigger finger, reset the trigger, and then make it, on the recoil, pull the trigger again, as though the shooter had actually pulled the trigger.
So does the bump stock convert it to a fully automatic rifle? Because I think that's the argument that we're hearing, that you get a bump stock, and by placing that on your AR-15, now your rifle is a fully automatic rifle. You have something that is banned on NFA item by just buying something over the counter.
And all of that is true. It does add a quasi-automatic functionality to the rifle. But a bump stock could fit any rifle. I could make a bump stock, literally I could make a bump stock to fit my lever action rifle, although it wouldn't cycle rounds because I have to cycle them manually, lever action. But any weapon, any rifle which can automatically reload itself, i.e. a semi-automatic rifle, could be modified with a bump stock. You just have to machine the wood or the fiberglass or whatever that stock was made of so that you'd have a loose fit. But that loose fit is why most of us who do any kind of shooting at any kind of range wouldn't own a bump stock for anything. One, they spray rounds. They destroy all semblance of accuracy. They have no purpose. They're not useful for self-defense. They're not useful for hunting. They're not, and by the way, self-defense is what most of us who own weapons own them for. It's not just for hunting. I haven't been hunting in 15 years. I still own weapons. I won't give them up. But I won't own a bump stock because even if I did own a bump stock, I would never find a practical use for it.
Mm-hmm.
So you sound like you were in agreement with the bump stock ban then.
Would you say that you were in agreement with it, or?
I don't know that we need to ban the bump stock. I think what we need to do is we need to understand why people want bump stocks. And I think we're going to get to this topic later on when we talk about what the Bible has to say about how to stop mass shootings. Because truthfully, the only place, I can't think of any other place where a bump stock was ever used except that shooting you alluded to in Las Vegas, Nevada. And its sole purpose was to fire into a very dense crowd with no intent to target any one individual. It has no other purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the gun community seemed like they went in an uproar when this happened because the president basically decided he's going to ban the bump stock. But based on what you're saying, it seems like it's an easy give for the gun community.
The problem, unfortunately, is that in the current political environment, nothing is an easy give for the gun community. Nothing can be. Because every time we who own guns and exercise our Second Amendment right, and by the way, it's a right that ends with shall not be abridged. Mm-hmm. Every time we've given anything up, the anti-gun crowd has come back and demanded more. So that's why I say I don't see any practical value in the bump stock. I don't see any use for the bump stock. I wouldn't own one. But I don't see banning them, because banning them is adding one more rule, one more law to something that rules and laws haven't affected.
Interesting.
Stop and consider. Make firearms illegal, and every law-abiding person will give up their firearms. And the man on the street who is not law-abiding will go to the same places he's always gone, and he'll buy a firearm. And if you can't find a firearm, there are plenty of them who, like me, have been engineers, who understand science, who are good with tools, who could make a weapon. I literally could take a piece of black iron pipe and make a weapon of any size you could handle. I could make a 4-inch mortar out of a black iron pipe. I could make an 8-inch mortar out of a black iron pipe and fire a 15-pound shell with an explosive in it, and I can build the explosive from scratch.
I hope you don't have any at home.
I do not. I did, as a teenager, actually make napalm bombs to fire out of a slingshot.
Oh, wow.
It's that easy.
Right.
And I didn't have to read on the internet, because when I was a teenager, we didn't have computers, let alone the internet.
Oh, wow. We're not going all the way back there. Something that's always on my mind, though, because it seems to me that, and I could be wrong on this, but it seems to me that the First Amendment is just that. The First Amendment is not in the news, is not in politics. Politician doesn't talk about it every time they get up before a mic. But the Second Amendment seems to be like it's always something to beat upon. Like it's not as important as the First Amendment. Why is the Second Amendment,
viewed that way? Like why
viewed
is it
as being something political?
Because the Second Amendment gives every American the right to keep the First Amendment. And the ability to do so. We have the ability to not be stifled by someone who comes along and, because he's a bigger bully and he's tougher than a 66-year-old man who can't fight very well, could shut me up. But he won't if he knows he's dealing with someone who's armed. He won't attack me to shut me up. And that's why the Second Amendment gives us the ability to defend our right to the First Amendment. Totalitarian governments always
take away gun first.
Have started by taking away guns first. And then by stifling all criticism.
Isn't that what Hitler did?
Absolutely. Hitler, Mussolini. I could run you through a whole raft of them that you would know about today. But as a matter of fact, you could go all the way back into the days of David and King Saul, when the people of Israel at one point had nothing but plowshares, and they didn't even have anything except a file to sharpen them with, just in case they might turn them into weapons.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Because they were in slavery. And the king who had them in slavery did not want them revolting against him.
So disarm the population, first step for totalitarian government. And usually it's under the guise of, hey, we're here to help you, we're here to protect you.
Oh, always. Always.
So give us your weapons so that you can be safe. We'll protect you with police. And I think maybe now, today, people are beginning to realize, especially with the riots and everything happening in the streets, that we're responsible for our own safety. And the police being several minutes away when you need them, like right now, is really no comfort.
Well, in the protest, they might be several hours away because they're probably not going to come.
Or they may not even come at all.
While the protest is going on.
Right.
I am affiliated with several and surrounding states' militias. And I use the term militia because we are an armed populace. Mm-hmm. But we all work with local law enforcement. We keep track of what's going on. We tell them when we know of something they need to know about. We help them to be safer than they would normally be if they didn't have someone watching, in the military parlance, watching their six. Mm-hmm. we provide them intelligence because we're not against the police.
Mm-hmm.
But where I live, I've got many friends on the county police department. And in fact, 2 doors down from me, which is half a mile away, there's a couple who are both county police. But in a pinch, they can't get to me any quicker than a message can be routed through 911 to their dispatcher, to them, if they are on duty, and they can come down and help me out. That's way too long.
Mm-hmm.
I saw a sign one day in front of someone's house that said, the police respond in 9 minutes. My 45 responds at 840 feet per second. It really is true that the bad guy who's facing a gun is a lot more afraid of the gun he's facing, if he thinks you'll use it, than he is of the police, who he hasn't even heard the sirens crank up yet.
Yep.
But if the person he's attacking is unarmed, he's brazen, he's emboldened.
Oh, absolutely.
Do you think you mentioned before that most everyone in this country who owns a firearm owns it for protection? Do you think, in your opinion, that owning a firearm is a sort of a lack of trust in God, or do you feel like it's a lack of faith or a lack of trust to own a firearm as a Christian, since we're talking about Christians and firearms?
Not at all. It depends more on what your faith is in.
Mm-hmm.
If I trusted my firearm to save my life, I would never be able to sleep. Because obviously, if I'm asleep, I can't use my firearm. I can't respond.
Oh, I see. Mm-hmm.
But if I trust God, the God I serve, the God I love, the God who promised never to leave me, then having a firearm is merely a means of being able to effectuate his desires when he tells me, this is the one that you use it on. Because in the Old Testament, there are many cases where God said, as a friend of mine in Japan used to tell me when I would ask him silly questions, he was 78 years old, he was a pastor of our church, I was about 23. I tended to ask silly questions. He would say, hide and watch. Well, God in the Old Testament often told his people, hide and watch. And the following thought to that was, and let me be God. I will do what needs to be done. But there were other times he said, wait till you hear a sound of the going in the tops of the mulberry trees. Then you'll know that my spirit is moved, and then go and attack them. Well, what are you going to attack them with if you don't have a weapon? With what do you defend if you don't have a weapon to defend? And God expects us as responsible Christians to do for everyone the things that we can do, but he also expects us as responsible Christians to ask his guidance at every step.
Definitely. I want you to compare and contrast 2 verses for me. I heard a preacher preaching once, and he was in defense of gun through the Bible. And he compared Luke chapter 10, where Christ sent out the 70 2 by 2. And he said, in Luke chapter 10, verse 4, it says, carry neither purse, nor scrip, nor shoes, and salute no man by the way. But in Luke chapter 22, and that's when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he was about to be betrayed and delivered up to. And he said, and the Bible says there in Luke chapter 22 and verse 36, then said he unto them, but now he that had a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip. And he that had no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. And the preacher was saying that the sword there today would be the gun.
Yes, that would be true.
So he was using this verse to say that Christians, we should own firearms. Is that a stretch?
I don't believe that's a stretch at all. I believe it's an issue of timing. And it's an issue of God's timing, which is not always comprehensible to us. But there are times when God says, no, I want you to go and be peaceable, and I will take care of you. 100%. Walk into the mouth of the lion's den. Did Daniel take a weapon into the lion's den with him?
No.
He didn't. And so when the king asked him in the morning, Daniel, are you still with us? He said, yes, God closed the mouths of the lions. He didn't have a weapon. God didn't give him reason to take a weapon. But there were many other times when God's people were told, take a weapon. So it's a question of timing. God's timing, not ours.
Oh, definitely.
Interesting.
It was just an interesting contrast because I've never heard someone use basically evangelism, a verse that talk about evangelism, and contrast it with a verse. I guess you can argue it's also evangelism, but argue for his gun right. So, should we have a fundamental right in this country to own firearms? Is that a God-given right?
I believe that it is a man-recognized right. But whether God actually... Well, our founding fathers had an argument about whether they should even enumerate the rights that are enumerated in the Bill of Rights. And the argument was not, do you have those rights? The argument was, if we enumerate those rights, someone will find a way to say, well, but this wasn't included in that list. Certainly the arguments about how to interpret the Second Amendment are based on that same logic. That's a flawed logic.
So talking about how to interpret the Second Amendment, I was listening to a show and they said that the argument was that when the Second Amendment was written, the popular firearm in the country was a musket. So he must be talking about a musket. What do you say about that?
Why would our founding fathers, when they were watching the development of weaponry, have ever limited that right if they didn't state that they were limiting that right? Because there were gunsmiths all over the country. In fact, I read a compendium once of guns of the Old West. And I was bewildered at over 185 different designs of weapons, some of which I never had any idea even existed.
Oh, wow.
There was a weapon called a Lamat revolver, which carried 11 44 caliber balls around the cylinder. And then in the cylinder, in the center of the cylinder, it carried 5 shotgun shells. And it was a pistol. I could not imagine firing a pistol like that, even one round at a time, without breaking my wrist. You'll never find a Lamat anywhere in existence today, as far as I know. There might be one at the NRA museum, but if it is, it's probably inside of a locked case with lots of alarms on it because it's so rare.
Probably millions.
But there were more breeds of weapons than I can imagine. And if you go back and you look at colonial days, if you go back and look even during the Revolution, every gun owner, every farmer, every would-be citizen of the fledgling United States had some kind of a weapon. Many of them were homemade. Many of them were handmade. But many of them had cannons. Homemade, handmade, small artillery. So I suppose if we were to apply that thought today, that whatever was the common weapon of the day, that's all we should be limited to, I should probably have a 105 recoilless rifle somewhere around my place. And I don't know too many armored cars will stand up to a 105 at a mile. So bring them on.
Well, the way I look at this is that I think they're being disingenuous because if you go to the First Amendment, which is what I always compare it to, if you go to the First Amendment and you say, okay, what was the popular means of communication back then? You know, you're not going to say computers, internet, social media, television, maybe not even radio.
Fastest and longest range you had was jump on a horse and ride.
Yeah, but they would never limit the First Amendment to what we had when their forefathers writing the Constitution.
No, absolutely not.
Because they want to have the right to be heard on all different medias, internet and all these things. But when it comes to the Second Amendment, as we discussed earlier, it's always how we can limit it.
Yes. And so that was the argument against enumerating the Bill of Rights in the first place. And sure enough, that argument about which you are speaking right now is a perfect example of what subtle minds bent on evil try to accomplish. But it occurred to me as you were talking about that, when our founding fathers wrote the First Amendment, they could not have possibly envisioned all the methods of communications we have available today.
Absolutely not.
They could not have. But they were wise enough to know they could not. So take the language of the Second Amendment. which contains no more strictures than does the First Amendment. And apply that same logic. They didn't get stupid between writing the First and Second Amendments. They clearly understood that they did not know what all kinds of firearms man could or would need.
Plus, they just defeated a government with firearms that they wanted to break from.
Yes, and that government, by the way, banned every firearm they owned.
So basically, they're saying, hey, no, we just defeat this government. We no longer want to rule us. We're going to give our people the right not to ever fall back to where we were.
Think about it this way, and I suspect you probably are. We just defeated a government that was horrendous and we didn't want to be governed by it. And we don't ever want to run the risk of being that government ourselves. So we give our people the right, the ability. We recognize the right and the ability. The same right we just exercised to gain our freedom. We give our people the right. We recognize that right. That they will never have to suffer our tyranny.
How would you defeat the argument, though, that civilians today can't keep the government in check? The government have bigger, better, stronger, more powerful guns than any civilians today. So,
right, I think that's a great point because the point of the Second Amendment. Let's not talk about hunting and all these things, although those things are great, self-defense. And the point of the Second Amendment, I think, is to keep a government in check and keep it from becoming usurpacious. In other words, keep tyranny from taking root. So, but the current argument that I've heard in the media and in other from other people is, well, what's the point of being armed to defend yourself against the government, for example, that's trying to become totalitarian, whatever, when their military has, aircraft and tanks and all these different things? What could you possibly do against a government like that? What would your response to that be?
Well, two of the places where we have militarily seen that all of our technology doesn't help us to win a battle is in the early stages in Afghanistan, fighting against the Taliban. A whole raft of men who were mounted on camels and had nothing but rifles, and they shot down our helicopters. Mm-hmm. They hid in caves.
They knew their terrain so well.
They knew their terrain. Yep. They knew everything about where they were going. And in Vietnam, our biggest problem was figuring out who's the bad guy. Mm-hmm. Because the barber today is the Viet Cong tonight. During the day, he won't slit your throat because he knows that the police will be on him. He'll get shot by the military. But at night, he's looking for every opportunity. How do you decide? So all the weapons in the world don't solve that problem. Technology doesn't solve that problem. Boots on the ground solve that problem, but boots on the ground put our people directly in that line of fire. The answer to the argument about rifles is this. I have a 30-30, which is a lever action rifle. It's a deer rifle. Now, being a lever action, and everybody who knows deer rifles knows that's not using the conventional round for it. That's not a very good long-range rifle. I use a little different round than the standard for it, and I've about tripled the range. It's effective out to about 400 yards. That's by no means the limit of the effectiveness of a 30 caliber rifle, because the 308, which is the premier sniper rifle, is a 30 caliber rifle and effective to about 1,800 yards in the right hands. So it's not a question of, do we have rifles that can do the job? And by the way, you can buy a Macmillan 50, a 50 caliber armor-piercing round that's almost 2 inches long, has a velocity of almost, I believe it's 5,800 feet per second, and can literally blow a car's engine, can crack a car's engine, crack a car's engine block. That's what it's for. That's what its purpose is. And you can buy that as a civilian if you have enough money. And it's fully legal. It's not an automatic weapon. It's a single shot, fires from a box magazine. Can be had. I know where to get it. You can buy a .338 Lapua, and a .338 Lapua was used in Iraq by a British SAS sniper at a range of a little over 1.75 miles to take out a machine gun nest. Mm. Now, it takes some tremendous skill to do that. I don't expect anyone here to typically be able to do that. But I read an interesting statistic not too long back, and it was posted by someone who has access to the hunting license registration counter for the state. 2019, 1.75 million hunting licenses for big game sold to hunters in big game qualifies as deer, bear, and of all things, turkey. I don't expect turkey to be big game. But a bear can eat you. And a deer can definitely kick you to death if he wants to.
Mm-hmm.
But stop and think that at the ranges we hunt those things, we hunt them at anywhere from 150 yards in light brush to over open space out to 600 or 700 yards. The point the person made was there are 1.75 million snipers in Virginia not employed as snipers today, and that doesn't include all the military people who are trained as snipers and didn't go get a hunting license.
Mm-hmm.
And that's only...
So I think the average person listening to you would be like, that's so frightening. That's so scary. What's wrong with these people? Don't they see what's wrong with this idea? Don't these people care that, when you're armed with weapons, you're enabling people to carry out these mass shootings and, everyone would just be better if no one had weapons. So my question to you is now I'm hearing you talk like this and I'm like, well, yeah, come on with it. Let's all be armed and but see, this goes back to the fact that what you said at the beginning, we all respect each other. We respect life. And it's not about, it's not necessarily like, like bumping your chest. Like I'm the biggest guy on the block. Look at my guns or anything like that. It's nothing like that. It's by no means. So that's how we're looking at it. But I would imagine that at least in today's culture, the average American would just be like, this is just so terrible. Let's just all this. What would you say to someone that would say to you, goodness, you're talking about all these weapons like it's just, like it's nothing. You must not care about life. You must not care about these mass shootings. You must not see in the news all of the death happening around us. What would you say to someone like that? And what would be your argument if someone says that you don't care about, say, school shootings because you own firearms?
At the risk of sounding very, very political, I saw a bumper sticker I absolutely loved. It said, "My gun has killed fewer people than Ted Kennedy's car." For anyone who doesn't get the reference, we're talking about Mary Jo Kopechne at Chappaquiddick.
That's great, actually.
And I have never shot my gun at a human being. I've never even pointed my gun at a human being. For the very reason that I respect life. And I am by far more comfortable around a group of armed citizens of the United States than I am around a group of totally unarmed citizens of the United States. I attended a first aid training session on Thursday evening last week. And I noticed that of the 14 of us who were at that session, 9 weapons were obvious, carried openly on hips. I also happen to know that half the people in that group have concealed carry permits, and they were not all open carrying. I was very comfortable with that crowd. They don't wave their guns around. They don't play with them. They're not toys. They are tools for a purpose. And when there's no nail to be driven with that hammer, they don't take that hammer out of the hammer loop. Mm-hmm. And I use that analogy of the hammer and the nail very carefully because any weapon that can project a slug of any kind, even a bow and arrow, all it is a tool. It has no brains. It has no malice. It has no capability to fire itself. It can't load itself. It cannot do a lick of harm by itself. I say to people who see them and are afraid of them, sorry for you. You have a totally unfounded fear. Mm-hmm. There's a lady named Paxton Quigley who wrote a book called Armed and Female, and I have given away more copies of that than I ever thought I would ever own. Having read it once, I realized it really is needful for both men and women to read it. Paxton Quigley was one of the founders of Firearms Control Incorporated, one of the earliest of the Ban the Gun crowd. Mm-hmm. But being a thinking woman, she had a friend who was a handgunner, and she said, one day I decided I needed to know what it was I was talking about. So I went to a gun shop with him. I asked him to show me a bunch of guns. I asked him to take me on the range to shoot. And it was an epiphany. I'm not afraid of guns. I don't think all women need to own guns. This is Paxton Quigley's own words. Mm-hmm. I don't think all women need to own guns. But I think every citizen of the United States should understand guns and should understand exactly what they are talking about when they talk about guns.
Yeah, definitely.
And, oh, by the way, Paxton Quigley, as of 2015, I believe it was an IPSC championship shooter, which means she could put more rounds downrange and hit more targets than the average person will ever even be able to dream of doing in less time. I've heard her gunfire roll described as sounding like a fully automatic weapon from a Glock 19 pistol.
Oh, wow.
And she didn't waste any shots. It's a woman who used to hate handguns, who used to want all handguns to be banned. Would that all Americans were willing to think. Would that all people around the world were willing to think. At least to understand what it is they are decrying.
That sounds a lot like, I don't know if you're familiar with Colion Noir, but he's a gun advocate now, and he has a very similar story where he started out being petrified of guns, fairly anti-guns, and he's a black guy, so he was just kind of more on the progressive end of things when it comes to guns.
But he's probably seen the mean streets, too.
Yeah. He actually grew up next to a trap house. So he's seen the mean streets, but he was always petrified of guns. But it wasn't until a friend invited him to the range and explained the weapons to him and showed him how to shoot and just taught him pretty much what Quigley went through. And that's when he realized this is just a tool. This is just a tool. And he said, in his words, it blew him away that he could handle or at least manipulate or control an explosion in his hand, which is basically what pulling the trigger is.
Sure.
And then that's when he realized this is nothing to be afraid of. And now he's a gun advocate. So that sounds very similar to what he experienced.
Yeah, my lifelong fascination has been with high energy physics, which explosions fall under. And gun explosions are pretty small high energy physics, but I absolutely love them for that reason. Mm-hmm. Now, I like the fact that I can defend my family with a gun. But for me, a gun is fun in the right place. But again, in the right place. On a range where I know what's behind my target, where I know I'm not going to hit anything on a ricochet. My oldest son has a range right outside his front door on his property up in Pennsylvania.
I need to go visit him.
Oh, it's great fun. He has barrels that we put holes in with his shotguns. Take my .40 caliber pistols up there, and I take a paper target, and I blow away an awful lot of inoffensive paper. It's fun. Mm-hmm. But I've never pointed my gun at a human being. I've never even pulled my gun out of a holster toward a human being with any intent to get anywhere near it. In fact, what you two probably don't know about me is that I'm currently carrying 3 knives. If I hadn't said it, you wouldn't know.
No.
But I have one clipped in my pocket. I have one in a money card, a key card. Actually, it's like a money clip in my pocket. It's called a credit card knife. And I have one on my Leatherman, which nobody ever thinks of. I carry them with me everywhere I go. I've carried a knife since I was about 6 years old, and I have never, ever pulled that knife out, pulled any weapon out against anyone, even though I got beat up often as a preacher's kid in small towns. Never pulled a knife out.
That's interesting.
Respectable, honorable gun owners don't play with guns. And they certainly don't go to schools and shoot people. In fact, a shooting down in Florida, the patrolman whose job was to be school security sat outside the school while a shooter killed a number of students in the school. He was afraid to go in. He said, I was waiting for backup. I know any number of people here, myself included, who would have been in the school and shot the shooter before he got 3 shots off. It would just been a matter of how long it took us to find him. Congressman Steve Scalise was shot by a guy who walked across an open park, not very far from where I lived at the time, and opened fire on a congressional baseball team as they were practicing for baseball. Almost killed Congressman Steve Scalise. A very courageous Fairfax County policewoman and a very courageous Fairfax County policeman engaged him in gunfire. He had a rifle. They had pistols. I don't wish that I had been there to help. But on the other hand, I wish I could have provided help. And I know any number of gun owners who would have. Why? We respect life. That's the point. We respect life.
So what can be done about mass shooting and all these shooting that's going on?
We are not going to, short of the changes made in the spirit by salvation, by God's forgiveness, by understanding the undying love of a God who sent his son to die on the cross for us. But God loved us, Romans 5:8, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Paul talks in Romans about the fact that those who don't know God, don't know Christ as their Savior, they are at enmity with God. They can't understand God. It's impossible. They can't. And yet, Christ died on the cross. John 3:16, that all should be saved. Mm-hmm. Other verses that talk about, but God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. Behold, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away, all things are become new. There is the answer to the school shootings. There is the answer to the mass unrest. There is the answer to BLM. I don't know anyone, and I know many, many, many people of all colors. I'm not going to say races because biologically God said we are one race. And by the way, look in the Bible. You will not find God ever talking about races. He talks about creeds, languages, tongues, nations, tribes, families. I think there may be some other references. There's not one of them that ever talks about races.
Yep.
We are one race.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, for anyone who doesn't know, because they can't see us, you are black. I'm white. Mm-hmm. And I love you both.
We love you.
I have a daughter who is black. I have a son-in-law who is black. I have 2 grandsons who are black. I don't know any white people. Personally, I don't know any white people who hate black people or who think that black lives don't matter. But we also think that all lives matter. And I believe that's what you believe too. I don't even think you have to tell me that.
Oh, definitely.
So if all lives matter, and if God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance, I think there's our answer. The problem being that God said, we're never going to hit 100%. Because Satan runs this world. And mass shootings, they're not Christians' work. They're not God's work. They're not Christ's work. They're Satan's work. And that'll never change. They will always be Satan's work. That will never change.
MD, thank you for joining us on the Removing Barriers podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening. To get a hold of us or to support this podcast, go to anchor.fm/removing barriers. This has been the Removing Barriers podcast. We attempted to remove barriers so that we all can have a clear view of the cross.